You know that person. Maybe it's your boss, the one who runs a multi-million-dollar company, signs off on budgets that would make your head spin, and yet every single morning pulls into the parking lot in a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with a small scratch on the rear bumper that's been there since 2019. No detail, no new car smell, just the same car every day. Or maybe it's your uncle, the one who quietly paid off his house, put 3 kids through university, and still drives a Civic he bought during the Obama administration. You've offered to help him find something better. He smiled and said, "It gets me where I'm going." And you've wondered why. Why would someone who can upgrade choose not to? That question seems simple, but the answer reveals something profound about identity, ego, confidence, and the way we really think about money. Let's paint the picture more clearly. This is not someone who can't afford a luxury car. That's the key distinction. This isn't about poverty. This isn't about bad credit or financial desperation. The person we're talking about has options. Real options. They could walk into a BMW dealership tomorrow, point at something on the floor, and drive it home. But they don't. Instead, they drive something reliable, modest, maybe a little forgettable. A Honda, a Toyota, a Ford F-150 that's older than most of the interns at their company. They don't talk about it. They don't apologize for it either. It's just the car. And here's what's strange. When you look closely at these people, a pattern starts to emerge. Many of them are quietly successful. Many of them are deeply secure in who they are. Many of them seem almost unbothered by what other people think, which raises the real question, not why won't they upgrade, but what do they already know that the rest of us haven't figured out yet? Most people hear this and jump to the obvious conclusion. They're cheap. It's the first thing people say. Oh, he's just tight with money. She's a penny pincher. They don't like spending on themselves. The assumption is that frugality, maybe even fear, is driving the decision. And okay, sometimes that's true. Some people genuinely are anxious about spending, and the old car is a symptom of deeper financial insecurity. But that's not who we're talking about today. We're talking about the person for whom money genuinely isn't the obstacle, and yet the assumption of cheapness follows them anyway. Think about that for a second. We live in a world where the default assumption is that if you can spend more, you should. Not upgrading is treated like a flaw, almost like a failure of ambition, as if restraint is the same thing as limitation. But psychology suggests something entirely different is happening here. Here's where things get interesting. Research into consumer behavior has consistently shown that the relationship between wealth and spending on visible luxury items is far more complicated than it looks. The people most aggressively displaying wealth through cars, watches, and designer goods are often not the wealthiest people in the room. They're the people most anxious about their place in the room. Luxury consumption, when it's driven by status anxiety, is essentially a performance. It's communication directed outward. The message being sent is, look at what I have, therefore look at who I am. But what about the person who doesn't feel the need to send that message? What does that mean? It means their identity isn't resting on what other people think of them. And that, quietly, is one of the most psychologically powerful positions a human being can occupy. Let's go one level deeper. Psychologists who study status and self-concept talk about something called external versus internal validation. External validation means your sense of self-worth is built from the outside, from approval, from perception, from what others reflect back at you. A luxury car in this context is a tool. It exists to be seen. The driver doesn't just want transportation, they want recognition. Internal validation is different. It means your sense of self-worth is anchored from the inside, from your own values, your own assessment of your choices, your own clarity about who you are. When someone has that, they don't need the car to do the talking. This is why you'll notice that people who never buy luxury cars often have another quality in common. They don't need to convince you of anything. They're not performing, they're not positioning, they're just living. Think about it. When was the last time you met someone deeply at peace with themselves who was also desperately chasing external symbols of success? The two rarely coexist, because peace doesn't need an audience. You've seen this dynamic play out in small, specific ways. There's the neighbor who worked as a surgeon for 30 years, drove a Ford Explorer the entire time, and retired with no debt and a portfolio that let him travel the world. His colleagues drove BMWs. He drove to the same hospital, did the same operations, ate lunch at the same cafeteria. When someone once asked him about the car, he said, "Nobody gets better surgery from a doctor who drives a Mercedes." There's the entrepreneur who sold her tech startup for 8 figures and kept driving the Hyundai she had during the company's early years. Not as a stunt, not for publicity, just because she'd never found a reason to change it. "It's already paid for," she said, and moved on. These aren't people who are unaware of luxury. They know what a Porsche feels like. They've ridden in them. Some of them have rented them on vacation. They simply made a different calculation, and that calculation wasn't just financial. So what does this really mean? On the surface, it's about cars. But underneath, it's about the relationship between what we own and who we are. Here's a truth that consumer culture works hard to obscure. For most people, the purchase of a luxury item is not about the item. It's about the story the item tells, about them to others and to themselves. The luxury car isn't just transportation, it's a signal. It says, "I've made it, I matter, I'm worth noticing." And that signal is directed at a very specific audience. People you're trying to impress or fears you're trying to quiet. But here's the strange part. The people who never buy the luxury car often aren't suppressing that desire. They've moved past it. They reached a point through experience or self-awareness or simply time where the gap between who they are and who they need others to think they are closed. And once that gap closes, the expensive signal becomes unnecessary. The car stops being a status symbol and starts just being a car. There's another layer here too, and it's practical. People who consciously avoid luxury car purchases are often running a very different financial operating system than the people around them. Where others see a car as an emotional investment, something that makes them feel successful, they see it as a depreciating asset. Useful, replaceable, not worth emotional attachment. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. And that clarity tends to extend outward. The person who doesn't need the car to feel validated also tends not to need the watch, or the house in the right neighborhood, or the vacation that photographs well. They've quietly opted out of the comparison economy. And the financial result over decades is almost always dramatic. Most people never realize this. The real cost of status seeking isn't just the price of the car. It's the compounded opportunity cost of every dollar spent performing success instead of building it. Near the end of every conversation about wealth and psychology, you eventually arrive at the same question. What if enough is enough? We live in a culture that treats more as the only direction. More car, more house, more visible proof that you've succeeded. The baseline keeps moving. The comparison never stops. And most people spend enormous amounts of energy, financial, emotional, psychological, on a race that has no finish line. But some people step off, not because they've given up, not because they're defeated, but because they decided at some point that their value as a human being had nothing to do with how impressive their parking space looked, that their confidence didn't need to arrive in a German vehicle, that who they are doesn't require a monthly lease payment to be legible to strangers. What if the quietest people in the room are the ones who've already figured out something the loudest ones haven't? What if confidence doesn't actually look the way we were taught to think it does? What if the most secure person in any room is the one who has absolutely nothing to prove? Here's what I keep coming back to. The person who never buys the luxury car isn't making a statement about cars. They're making a statement, or rather, they've stopped making statements about themselves. They've moved their identity somewhere safer. Somewhere that can't be repossessed. Somewhere that doesn't need to be detailed twice a year to stay impressive. And maybe that's the real flex. Not the car in the driveway, but the complete absence of needing one to feel like enough. So I'll leave you with this. How much of what you drive or want to drive is about getting somewhere, and how much of it is about something else entirely? What does your car say about you? And more importantly, who are you when the car is out of the picture?